Hello and welcome to the start of Lore Diver Series 2, the Arcane Age. In this series, I'll be examining the Forgotten Realms in deep antiquity, a time when magic was free and the world was a legit high magic fantasy setting. Now, before diving into the details for all these different places that I'm going to be talking about over the next few months, what we have to do first is establish the stage, because this world is not the one that you are familiar with if you've been playing Forgotten Realms in the modern era in any way, shape, or form, like whether it was in first, second, third, fourth, or even fifth edition. It is a completely different world. So, time to set the stage. Let's dive into the lore of the Arcane Age. So we'll start with sort of a broad overview. And for the purpose of this series, I've extended the idea of the Arcane Age to encompass a much larger time frame than what is traditionally considered to be the Arcane Age, which is the end of the Age of Nethril. Now, why have I decided to do this? It's because so much more is going on than what is happening in Nethril that it needs to be given some attention. And not just going on, but going on for a much longer time. So the timelines I'm using are Deep Antiquity, which is going to run from around minus 8,000 Dale Reckoning up to minus 4,000 Dale Reckoning. Then there's Antiquity, which is covering from minus 4,000 to minus 1,000 Dale Reckoning once again. And the Final Days, which runs from minus 1,000 to 1 DR. Now, I realize this goes over the end of Nethril, but there's a reason for it. Trust me, just go with it. Now, each of these broad eras in the Arcane Age has a very different geopolitical situation going on. There's different powers in action, different groups are doing things, and most importantly, different groups are coming into the setting at different times. I mean, I looked at it and I think there was only a block of maybe 300 or 400 years where you had the majority of groups that existed in this era all doing stuff together at the same time. And something I'm going to add right now is that for the purposes of this examination, I'm just sticking to Faerun. So the core western half of the main continent of Toril. The reason for that is because we have the most information for it. There's not enough information for some of the other areas that I could comfortably go into it. It would just more or less be all speculation. And so I'm covering Faerun as the main area, and then depending on how things are going, maybe at the end of it, I'll do a special episode where I talk about the other parts of the Forgotten Realms and what may or may not be happening there based on the little information that's available. So, geographically speaking, there's a few notable differences between the Arcane Age and the modern Forgotten Realms. If you follow me on Twitter, a couple of days ago, I threw up a map that I had modified. It was a 3rd edition map, and I had a bunch of stuff drawn on it. And that more or less shows the years, times, and what's going on with what I'm covering on this series. Things are different. First and foremost, the Desert of Anarok, that location I hate so much because it's so nonsensical, it's gone. It doesn't even exist. It's a big, beautiful grassland. The northern glaciers, the Great Glacier and the Unending Ice Sea don't exist yet. So none of that stuff is in play. And there's still water and everything else in the land of the north. And there's much more actual wild terrain. And I don't mean wild in the sense of D&D, traditional D&D wild terrain where there's monster folk and beast folk living there, not humans and demi-humans. But wild in the sense of it is legitimately wild. There's no sentient sapient life out there, just dangerous monsters and animals. And that's it. So it's really cool in that sense. So there's a lot more frontier, a lot less of the place has been fully explored, and there's a lot more risk in leaving the places that are developed. And the next thing is magic. Oh man, magic. So as pretty much everybody knows, there's no 10th level or higher magic allowed in the Forgotten Realms. It's one of Mistra's big laws that she laid out. There are 10th level. There's still epic magic, which is sort of 9.5 level, and there's if you decide that you really want to take a risk with your sanity and life, 10th and 11th level spells are castable, but like the tables they made for it, it was not worth it. Like, you had to be made of horseshoes and 4 leaf clovers. Pardon me, sorry, I'm getting over a cold again. It's joys of parenthood. Yeah, you basically had to be like the luckiest person on the face of the planet in order to cast these spells in the modern era, with the exception of when Mystra was dead-ish again during the spell plague, when all of her rules went out the window. So magic is everywhere, and this is going to be factoring into like every episode of this that I do, because until minus 339 DR, like Dale Reckoning, when Karsus's folly occurs, where Karsus attempts to become a god, like become the god of magic, and it just wrecks him and wrecks it for everybody in the future, like literally like ruining it for everybody going forwards. Magic during this era is like free access Wi-Fi, and literally everybody has a way to access it. Like, we're talking anybody can learn cantrips, any class, any like there's nothing stopping anybody. And even learning sorry again. And even learning low-level spells, not a hardship. And not just that, there was no need for material components. Elves preferred to use material components as like a stabilizer for the magic that they cast. However, there was no requirement for it whatsoever. You could do everything with purely verbal and somatic. So, hand-waving and talking, you're casting spells. And this really changes everything, because no edition of Dungeons and Dragons has ever gone into this. Second edition very briefly offered up some 10th level spells in Dark Sun, where there was no prohibitions on higher level magic. And let me tell you, like, those spells were just absolutely horrific. And there was one of them that oh man, I'm so sorry, everybody. I ate a cough drop. I thought that was going to be enough. Right now, my throat is pretty rough, so this is going to be a bit of a short episode tonight. There we go. So, like, one of these spells in Dark Sun was like, you melted an army down into blood. That blood turned into a cloud, and then you moved that cloud over to where you wanted your army to be, and had it rain the blood back down, which then formed back into your army. Like, that was what was going on with 10th level magic. And it just got crazier. Like, based on descriptions of things in the Forgotten Realms books, I'm willing to go out on a limb and say that Karsus's Folly was not the first 12th level spell ever cast. I think it was the first human 12th level spell cast. I'm fairly certain at this point that the Sundering, giant magical ritual cast by the elves that broke the planet, pretty sure that was a 12th level spell. So I need to get a text. Yeah. No doubt. Ugh. So this, like, sheer access to magic just changes everything. And one of the issues that I've run into as I've been researching this is that, and you'll see in these episodes that are coming up, is that the world building for this era is more fractured and more disjointed than the modern era stuff is. There's a lot of incongruencies, a lot of inconsistencies with how magic has been applied to everything. And this is going to be addressed as I move forward with how I think that things probably should have gone. But that's the score. Like, it's there's a lot of magic going on, and it's awesome. And the last thing that we need to sort of address as a broad overview is the wreckage from the previous age is, let's see here, got a comment here, didn't Midnight almost rip the world apart by accidentally casting for... well, yeah, I see at the end of it now, it says no need to answer. I can't remember. I remember she did oh man, there's something, she did do something. I don't think it was... Man, it might have been prohibited. I'd have to read that series again. It's been a long time since I've read that series. So I'll have to look up at that. Good question. But yes, destroying the world is a potential downside to casting that magic. So it's creating a giant dead area of magic. So, as I was saying, the wreckage from the previous ages are still very fresh. Those are memories of it. So, this is sort of like people have seen and still have that cultural memory of all the crazy stuff that happened before. And this is like perpetuating forward into the world that I'm going to be talking about. So what did lead into the Arcane Age? Well, oh man, so much stuff. It's so cool. Like I love this age so much. So the world before the Arcane Age was racked by wars. They were fought on a level that wouldn't be seen again until the mutual destruction of Narfell and Raumthar. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And in terms of pure destruction, only the Sundering and the Spell Plague exceed the damage that was caused in these eras leading up to the Arcane Age. It was wild. So the area is known as the let's see here, what are the DR years of the Arcane Age? Generally speaking, like about minus 3,200 to minus 339 DR. The Age of Nethril is used broadly as the marker posts for what the Arcane Age is. I've extended it back to minus 8,000 because that's when things really kick off. You start seeing human empires and everything rising up. And I take it all the way up to 1 because that's sort of when you see the last remnants of the Arcane Age are sort of all but gone at that point. And the modern Forgotten Realms that we recognize is more prevalent. So, there we go. The lands of the Sword Coast and the North are primarily occupied by elves during this era, throughout the entire era. Both the elves and the land are recovering from the Crown Wars, a series of conflicts that spanned 3,000 years and radically rewrote the surface areas as elves torched forests, used high magic to commit war crimes, and just generally made everybody living in the Sword Coast and North's lives absolutely miserable. Elves at this time are broadly unpopular with their neighbors. War crime clock, exactly. Nobody likes the elves right now. Like, nobody. They're having a bit of a go at it again with Cormanthier, but in general, elves are in a state of retreat from encroaching human, dwarf, and orc populations. The Arcane Age marks both the most visible point for the withdrawal of the elves from the world. Like, this is when they're starting to leave in large numbers, and you're starting to see them reduce in influence in Faerun. But through Cormanthier, also their last attempt at staking claim to the world that they live in. Now, cutting a swath down the center of Faerun, right from, like, the Vilhan Reach up to the Cold Ocean. Creative naming there, by the way. Runs the scorched ruins of Astoria. Now, if you haven't heard of Astoria, I don't blame you. It does not get the attention that it deserves. Hey, if you've played the Storm King's Thunder, you've gotten a glimpse of what's going on with giants in the Forgotten Realms. And this place is like, it's wild. It's a giant kingdom of it's a giant kingdom. It's the kingdom of giants. Sorry. Let's see here. Cold Ocean, Warm Peninsula. Yeah, exactly. True giants, giant king. They're all set up in the Ordning, and they've just had a huge war with the dragons that finally ended in like a barely negotiated truce. And at this point, they're also starting to intermingle with the human populations of the land, so creating lineages of heroes and villains that are going to persist like into the modern era, which it's actually pretty cool when you get into like some of the stuff about giants. Like reading up on the Storm King's Thunder and reading up on giants in the realms really sort of highlight to me like how wrong we sort of like a lot of us have gotten giants over the years. Now to the south, an unending war between Ubtao and the Suruk continues. The scaled races are fighting in the jungles against the Coatls that Ubtao has imported to fight against them, and it's just a mess down there. However, the Suruk are on the decline, and the Yuan-Ti servants are largely taking the reins of this war. And they're now starting to enslave local humans, import lizard folk mercenaries, and, is trying to continue the conquest of Chult for reasons they don't fully understand at this point anymore. It's sort of like a forever war. The Suruk started it tens of thousands of years ago, and the Yuan Ti are just sort of keep it on going. Yeah, exactly. If they're lost in the thread. Yeah. Like, why do we fight? Well, we fight because we have to fight. You know, we've always been fighting. Why would we stop? So, like, in terms of, like, dates and events that's led up to this, so, and I really apologize for making that sound so much. So, minus 31,000 DR, the Tearfall event occurs. You know, I've mentioned the Tearfall a little bit before, and it's a little bit more important here. This is a catastrophic event that marks the backwards through time effect of the Sundering that occurs in minus 17,600 DR by the Sun Elves and their assistants. The planet is struck by an ice meteor that's hurled by Astrogath as she struggles against Ao. The Batrachi, who are the amphibian and fish creator race, lose their war against the Titans, so the giants, despite summoning a world-trashing primordial. And the planet gets seeded with dragon eggs. And finally, Ao breaks the world in two, separating out Abir and Toril into separate worlds, one under primordials and dragons, and the other under the gods. So, yeah, all that happened at once. I'm kind of amazed anybody survived that event at all. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is a lot of happenings all at once. All in 1 year. So, moving up from that, I don't even know how you follow that up. Astoria, the giant kingdom under Anam, it rises after this, and he establishes the Ordning, which is a caste system and hierarchy for true giants. His wife, Othea, cheats on him and produces numerous races that become known as giant kin, and she does this with, pardon me as I try to pronounce his name, Ulutiu, I believe. I think that's how it's pronounced, Ulutiu. Anyways, she's cheating on Anam like crazy with this guy, like Vodkin, what are they called there? They were reintroduced in 5th edition there. Wow, I can't even remember. Anyways, whole bunch of different giant groups all came out of their mixing, and this actually goes on for a long time. Like, nobody notices. So it's like, huh, there's a lot of giant kin running around. Yeah, I'm sure everything's fine. My wife wouldn't possibly be cheating on me. Yeah, so the kingdom goes to war against the dragons. The reasons for this war are never really laid out. It's sort of like, from what I've gathered, the conflict starts because they notice that dragons, when they become adults, are very dangerous. And the two groups sort of eye each other and decide that only one of them can be on top of things at once. So they go to war. And this war lasts for thousands upon thousands of years. And like, we're talking like minus 2,550 DR is when it sort of all finally ends. Othea's infidelity is discovered. Ulu Tiu exiles himself, and his corpse sinks into the cold ocean, which causes a massive, massive problem because he has a magical amulet that causes water to freeze around him, causing the endless ice sea and the great glacier to start developing. This environmental disaster is a major factor for all the nations living near the cold ocean. So, as opposed to our issues in real life where we have, ice caps melting, their problem is they can't stop the ice from forming. Meanwhile, Sun Elves, Moon Elves, Green Elves, and Dark Elves have it out during the Crown Wars, so it's 3,000 years of conflict. It ends around 9,000 or so DR, so just before my Arcane Age markers start at 8,000. And it all culminates in the 4th and 5th Crown Wars. So the 4th one, like the 4th Crown War, that sees the Dark Elves all get cursed to be drow, banished to the Underdark, all that stuff. Again, if you follow me on Twitter, you saw all this spool out the other night in a very long lore rant about what's going on with Dark Elves and drow. So that happens there, and this is enough that it finally draws the attention of Corlon Letharian, who, in a very rare public appearance, finally mandates an elven court to figure out what's going on. So he teleports all the main leaders of the remaining surface elves into one location, says, you're going to build a court here, and you guys are going to sort yourselves out and figure out what's happened and make sure it doesn't happen again. And the Elven Court does its thing, and they determine that the Vishantar Empire, a Gold Elf dominant group, was in fact the cause of all the problems. They actually are. They did their job. They found out what the problem was. And Vishantar immediately declares war on every other elven nation, because that's what sane people do, leading to another 200 years of bloodshed before they're finally stopped. And now elven survivor states continue to be a factor through the entire Arcane Age. Meanwhile, in the south of Faerun, the scaled races continue to thrive. So you've got, even as the Suruk are disappearing, you have the Yuan Ti continue on in Marishalk, which stays active one way or another right up to the modern day, where it's better known as Serpentes. And scattered across the Shining Sea and Great Sea areas and up towards Imiskar, where Mulhorand will eventually be, you'll find like scaled race enclaves, that whole area. Let's see, I got a comment here. We're not responsible for our war crimes and will engage in war crimes to prove it. Exactly. Yes, that was the Vishantar Empire in a nutshell. Like, just terrible. Oh, yeah. So yeah, sorry, I got sidetracked there. That was a great comment. So yeah, we've got the scaled races. So that's your Nagas, your lizard folk, all that sort of stuff. They're scattered all through there. Some of them even have like little kingdoms and cities and stuff. It's really cool. Now, what is actually affecting the world? Well, as I mentioned, from minus 2,550 DR onwards, the cold ocean is freezing, the Great Glacier is advancing, and everybody in the north is progressively turning to magic to hold back the impending ice, to the point where, like, it's not just like the humans of Netheril who are doing this, it's also the elves of Cormanthir, and pretty much anybody who has the magical ability to hold back the ice. Dragons, they are everywhere. And even after they have their own internal war, and this is really fascinating because when you break away from generic Dungeons & Dragons lore, their worlds get cooler and get more interesting and more nuanced. And in the Forgotten Realms, initially at least, there was no distinction between chromatic and metallic dragons. They were all one group, living, working, and doing everything together. And it was only after several thousand years of war with the giants, while under the effect of mythical, that the elves set up, I'll talk about in a second, that they finally have an internal civil war and split into the two groups that we now know, which I think is a lot cooler than just sort of automatically having them be separate, because it implies that there's more that you can do with them, especially if you draw on that deep history. So they've had their own internal war. They're a source of danger to all people, and not helping this is that elves have made a giant mythal that makes all dragons globally go crazy and rage whenever the King Killer Comet is visible to the planet. Now, they don't actually tell us how often this comet passes by the planet, but it's often enough that after reading descriptions of things, and especially when I found out that it affects anything that's draconic, all of a sudden the inability of kobolds or dragonkin or other groups to create cultures and civilizations that last for very long made sense. The reason being that they are frequently exposed to a 10 to 60 day long The Purge experience, where they all go crazy and try to kill each other and everything around them. Like, this is so bad that in minus 3,500 DR, the dragons attempt to destroy the comet magically. Sorry, they get together, like chromatic and metallic dragons, team up to try to stop this because it's so destructive and so horrible. And they try to shoot down this comet, and they miss. They hit the moon instead, creating the Tears of Saloon, the asteroid belt Saloon, the asteroid belt that surrounds the planet. So, just for like your own mental image, prior to 3500, the moon looks like our moon. It's a moon. Awesome. After that date, the moon is missing a significant chunk, probably visible from the ground, and there's now an asteroid belt around the planet. So, yeah, like that episode of The Tick. Yeah, exactly. Or if, like me, you watch way too much cooking anime and you watch a restaurant to another universe, much like the moon that's in that world, where there's just a big chunk scooped out of it. Yeah. So this is a problem that the dragons are having through the entire Arcane Age and actually into the modern age. This mythal remains active until 1373 DR when I can't remember his name. An evil wizard tries to activate or do something to the mythal, triggers a giant dragon rage, but also destroys the mythal. So as of 1373 DR, they're free of its influence, which is really cool because to me that means all of a sudden all these other groups that were affected by it can now stabilize, develop, and become cooler instead of, going crazy every few hundred or 1,000 years or so and wiping everything they've done out. So, yeah, that's a thing that's happening. And now the next cool thing is genies. Oh man, there's genies everywhere. Genies of all sorts. They're elemental servants, mortal slaves. They're highly active across the entire world. Most notably in Zakara, and then in the lands that are going to one day be known as Kalimshan. And now, while their actions in Kalimshan are going to be covered in the Kalimshan episode, possibly episodes, because, wow, there is a lot of amazing history for Kalimshan, and it has been so slept on, so heavily. Like, I'm both nervous and excited about just digging into that place more. Anyways, it's worth noting at some point, though, that probably during the Arcane Age, because that's when there'd be enough magic to do it with relative ease, the genies are overthrown in Zakara in an event that I describe as the Enlightening, which leads up to the new culture that we know in Al-Qadim. Sort of this enlightened, sorted out, really hyper-functional fantasy universe, or fantasy like subsetting. Meanwhile, Kalimshan and the areas that are influenced by it, they are more heavily influenced by the older genie-based culture, even after they've largely departed. And there's a whole bunch of really cool stuff going on in there, like genies, Janazi, a whole bunch of things that I'm going to be getting into. Really looking forward to dissecting Kalimshan for this series. Now, known successor states and colonies. This is going to be a category that I talk about a lot as we come up, and I'm going to be I have to be non-specific here because I'm not actually talking about a specific area. But if you saw the map that I put up on Twitter, you might have noticed that some of the civilizations have existed more or less continually for thousands of years. And for perspective's purpose, the only places I could think of off the top of my head in the real world that we can look at for that sort of continuity of culture and development are places like Egypt and China. I mean, everywhere else, like our history is sort of a drop in the bucket compared to the longer histories in these locations. And that's how long some of these places have been around for in a recognizable form. And then there's a myriad of actual successor states that have survived into the modern age, then a whole bunch more that fall into like an also ran category. Let's see here, common here, diaper genies? Yeah. Well, makes sense, probably. Why are you like this? Anyways, as part of the series, I'm going to be looking at the longevity that might affect these places in question. Since the Forgotten Realms is presented as depressingly static culturally, so I'm going to be looking at the successor states, how they developed, and how they might have been dramatically different if more attention had been applied to them as opposed to simplistic narratives. Now, the big thing here is that through this entire research process that I've been going through for these episodes, the biggest thing that I've noticed is that everything is being written to support the status quo of the modern Forgotten Realms. Even in places where some retconning or some rejigging or sorting out would improve things and create a more exciting modern world to exist in, and especially given like now that we've had this like giant semi reset to the world and all sorts of crazy stuff's going on, and people are talking about seeing places and things and cities that haven't existed for however long. Um, like this is where it's time to start grabbing onto some of this stuff and bringing it forwards, because like the place needs change. It needs to become more dynamic and more exciting, in my opinion. And writing all this deep history, like the people who wrote it, a lot, like some of it is quite good and it's really interesting, but at the same time, like you run into like these amazing narratives, and then they just sort of like hit a brick wall and stop because they've run into the modern era, or they've started to run into where the modern era's history really picks up, and these places can't exist anymore. So yeah, I'm going to be challenging that like through this entire thing. Now, my take on the place. Just straight up, the Arcane Age is, to me, the most interesting and potential-filled period of history in the Forgotten Realms. Like, bar none, way more things are possible, way more things are happening, and way more things are changing in this era than in any of the modern era stuff. And the issues that it has, almost like clockwork, it seems, are derived more from a lack of attention and care to the larger world, and how cultures actually interact in favor of sort of atomistically building something really cool, and then ignoring how much it would interact with everything else in the world around it. And a great example of that is actually Netheril itself. Netheril exists for a relatively short period of time, like just barely over 3,000 years. Yet it has like zero interaction with any of its neighbors. And it has actual neighbors, like powerful, like magically powerful, divine magically powerful, militarily powerful neighbors that are very easily its match. But if you read the books for it and the material for it, it reads as though Netheril exists in a near vacuum. Like there's Netheril, in the north of Faerun, and there's some barbarians around it and some jerk elves that nobody likes near them, and that's it. There's no Jamdath, there's no Imaskar, there's no Mulhoran, there's no Unther, there's no Corumshan or Kalimshan. There's no Cormanthir. Well, Cormanthir gets like a bare mention. It's like, oh yeah, this place is here too, but we don't interact with it. And so it's that sort of thing. And it's just like, why? Like, why would you not build this more cohesive world? So why do I like this world so much? Like I said, it reflects a fantasy world where magic exists. Magic in the modern era of the setting is, in my opinion, not well thought out. It's not filling any gaps. It's not making up for anything. It's not even really developing. It's very stagnant. And even in a world where there's no limit to the number of wizards the world can have, magic is treated like an extra that was bolted on. It's like, yeah, here's this medieval fantasy world. Oh yeah, there's magic, but it's mostly medieval fantasy world. Whereas in the Arcane Age, magic is integrated far better into the world. Sometimes nonsensically, sometimes inconsistently, but the integration is much higher, and as a result, the setting feels more natural for magic to exist in than Forgotten Realms, like modern era, can feel at times. Next up, Empires and Kingdoms. So I can't speak for anybody, but I get really tired of reading through Forgotten Realms material and encountering like every other nation is some sort of merchant oligarchy masquerading as nobility, or just a straight up merchant oligarchy. It's just exhausting. Like it's not a very functional form of government. It's not one that ever worked particularly well in the real world, and it's one that would probably work even less well in a fantasy world. But yeah, empires and kingdoms are what's going on in the Arcane Age, and it's awesome. There's magocracies or magocracies. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. There's the psiocracy, like Jamdath. It is literally a psionic empire. There's a genie empire going on with Kormshan. There's the shattered and balkanized elf nations, and it's awesome. There's so much interaction. There's so many things happening that it just, like, you start reading about it, and you start to get excited when you start to connect the dots, and create a more holistic world. Also there's more trade, there's more conflict, there's cultural exchange, all that stuff's going on, and it's fantastic. That's a comment here. Yeah, magocracies are so interesting. They're so kind of could in theory be post scarcity. And yeah, that's hang on. I think I'm almost finished this episode, man. Throat's killing me. That is a great comment. And that's one of the things that sort of gets touched on a little bit in some of the descriptions, where these sort of places, you're trying to figure out why they're still doing certain they still have certain practices going on, where it's like, no, this has to be capitalist, this has to be, like, we have to have, like, all these things happening. I'm like, well, man, like, your magic is literally like you teleported in an army of slaves for what? Like, you guys have the most amazing magic for this is Imiskar I'm talking about here. Their spatial magic was off the charts. Like, everything was a TARDIS with them, and they're using their power to like steal slaves from another planet to work for. Like, what the? Yeah. So yeah, it should be post scarcity, but oh yeah. And the final part is that, to me, this is actually a more free era to play in. And this sounds weird because you're playing, generally speaking, when you're playing in a historical setting game, there's a feeling of pointlessness to it. Like, that no matter what your characters do, if your GM or DM wants to follow the standard world's history, nothing matters. It's like, yeah, sure, you saved them all, but the next week the timeline straightens itself out and the city gets wiped out anyways. So, like, it sinks into the ground or something. But the world feels open. Things are happening. It's less stagnant. It's less predictable. And the other thing, too, is that it feels like a living fantasy world, and less like one that's been more or less the same over 5 editions of gameplay. Because, I mean, yeah, like, even 4th edition's nonsense was just sort of a speed bump on the road back to normality. So, for me, the Arcane Age feels like a more exciting and more interesting era to play in, because there's just so much more happening. So, last time I'm going to do that, I swear. Mostly because I'm on to the next episode part. In 2 weeks' time, Series 2 of the Arcane Age continues with Nethril. That's right, I'm kicking this series off for locations with Nethril, the most well-known and heavily written about nation of that era. Okay, so that's 2 weeks' time, so I don't have a calendar near me. I will use this one on my computer here. So that's going to be on the 24th of November. So mark that down, 24th of November. We're going to be covering Nethril, and it's going to be great. Lots of stuff going on. Yeah, floating cities, magic, gods, hubris, and craziness. I think at one point they actually managed to shoot one of their own cities down when they try a sunbeam spell. That's supposed to be a laser or something? I don't know. Crazy, though. That's where we're starting, though. 2 weeks' time. So thank you very much for listening. This has been Lord Iver, a POCGamer podcast. If you liked what you heard, please like and subscribe. And if you'd like to see more, head over to my blog, POCGamer.com, and check out POCGamer on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. If you'd like to support this podcast, there's links to my coffee on my blog and social media, and I've got a Patreon set up where you can become a long-term supporter if you so desire. And if you do that, you get a monthly Hexcrawl mini-map as a supporter reward. Music was provided by purple-planet.com. Thank you very much for listening, and have a great day.